Okay, I think it's time to get started. Welcome to our July webinar, where we're going to be talking about how to get meaningful feedback instantly during your meetings, classes or events. I'm Dermott from the Customer Success team, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Meetoo's CMO, Pete Eyre.
Hi there.
Pete and his team are constantly engaging with our customers to get feedback on all things Meetoo, so it's great to have you here, Pete. Okay, as always, please do connect to Meetoo for the session. We're going to be running a few polls, as well as looking for you to share any tips and ask any questions of us. So you can get the Meetoo app natively on iOS or Android devices, or visit web.meetoo.io on any browser device to access the web app. And then the all-important meeting ID for the session is 117075 218. And I can see that we've got quite a few people attending today's session, so I'd like to make sure that we get as many of you as possible connecting to the app so that you can fully participate. We've added the joining instructions to all of our slides, which is a best practice tip for you there to get maximum feedback. So if you haven't managed to join the session on Meetoo already, please do so as we go through the session. Okay, there's three main focuses for the session this morning: how to ensure honest, uninhibited feedback, some proven approaches to gain maximum participant feedback, and how to evaluate and get real value from your feedback report. Then at the end, we'll save a bit of time for some Q&A. So again, another good reason for you to access Meetoo and get through it. So collecting feedback or evaluation data during and after any meeting, training session or class is absolutely vital. You know, really without it, you don't have a real idea or proof of how the session went, only your own slightly distorted view. The biggest challenge, though, is probably to get honest feedback from your participants. And with that, you're going to want volume, quality of data, and then to have it in a timely manner to be able to actually react to it. Now, I've oversimplified things a little bit there, but I think it broadly covers most of the issue. So now I'd like to hand over to Pete to actually take us through our first section of this challenge.
Great, thanks Dermot. So I'm going to talk about how to ensure honest, uninhibited feedback. And the first thing I'd like to do is actually put a question to you, if I can please. So how do you currently gather feedback? So if you're logged into Meetoo, that poll should now have appeared on your screen. And you can put in more than one response on here, so all that apply, and then just click the send button in the bottom right hand corner. So do you do paper surveys post-session? Do you do online surveys, so potentially email them around afterwards, get people to fill in a survey? Do you do a straw poll in the moment, but maybe get people to put their hands in the air? Do you have conversations and networking opportunities afterwards? Do you use an app like we're using Meetoo today, or potentially clickers or keypads or an audience response system, or do you not collect any feedback at all? So if you could put in all that apply and click send, that would be great, please. I'll just give you a few more seconds. I can see those rolling in. Thank you. So 3, 2, 1, and we'll close that off. Thank you very much. And let's have a look at the results. They should have popped up on your screens now. So great. So actually a really broad spread there. And I think hopefully what we're going to share today is relevant across a lot of mediums of collecting feedback. And actually every environment is different. So we're not saying there's only one type of feedback that's the right answer. It's all about knowing the options available and the advantages and disadvantages of those and picking the right one. So without further ado, how do you ensure honest, uninhibited feedback? Well, you've just got to start by accepting that people are often not that motivated to give you that feedback or fill in evaluation forms. And it can be for a variety of reasons, from apathy to fear of retribution or other feedback from colleagues or bosses or peers. From experience, these would be our recommendations for ensuring you've got an optimal environment for feedback to come in. So first of all, remove all fear. Set clear expectations. How is it going to work? Will you be sharing the responses live? Will you be sharing the responses afterwards? Will you be identifying who sent those responses in? Often the key here is providing anonymity to get that honest feedback in. And don't forget, this works both ways as well. It's not just for the audience. Speakers, organisers and so on are open to constructive feedback, but generally not up for public shaming. So hiding the data or using some kind of moderation is something we'll look at later and can help with this. So next in line, honesty. Set the ground rules early. That you really, really value this feedback. Tell them it means something and show people how it's going to be used. Better still, prove it. So show them the results of previous feedback and what happened as a result of it and how it was used. It's really important here because for the most part, people are nice. They don't want to deliver negative feedback. It's not something they feel comfortable doing, especially if it's going to embarrass potentially the person on stage or who they're giving that feedback to. So set up the channel for them, make them feel comfortable, and try and elicit the most honest feedback. Next up, avoid unnecessary questions. You don't want people questioning or wondering why they're answering these questions or to go on too long. Each additional question potentially can see you having a drop in engagement, so really make it count. Which leads us to our next slight twist on the classic KISS acronym. Keep it short, stupid. Keep it short, keep it punchy, and make it meaningful. And finally, the Whiffen principle. What's in it for me? Now, there are many ways to incentivize people to give their feedback, and it could be something like gamification points or access to digital swag bag afterwards, or getting people to enter a draw. But actually, the most common one we see and the most powerful one we see is what we just mentioned before, which is sharing how the feedback will be used and people really knowing and believing their opinion counts. That's going to be the most powerful driver for getting them to feedback to you. Okay, so I'll just hand over to Dermot now.
Thanks very much, Pete. So, okay, let's have a little look at some proven approaches to get that maximum feedback. I'm guessing that's probably one of the biggest challenges that people face. But first of all, just want to look at two methodologies. So we've got real-time feedback versus reflective reasoning. Now, a brief definition. This is actually from Event MB, and I'll share the definitions afterwards. But real-time feedback relies on effective reasoning. It's an immediate human emotional response to a given situation, whereas reflective reasoning is grounded in the activity of remembering the result of the activity. Now, probably the most common example of reflective feedback is the post-session form or survey, and that's whether delivered on paper or online. And although there don't seem to be too many consistent response rate stats out there, the general consensus is that participation via these methods is relatively low compared to the number of original attendees. And another problem with reflective feedback methods is that they can't accurately capture the emotions of your meeting, your event or your class. And as a result, it's often only the negative memories that are highlighted. So it's often seen in TripAdvisor or similar type rating systems as people feel that they actually want to give constructive criticism. Also, as I'm sure you're aware, it can be really, really difficult to actually capture feedback once people have actually left your session. But in contrast, real-time feedback methods tend to yield much higher response rates, as most of your participants are captive and they actually feel obliged to submit their responses. Also, another benefit of the real-time feedback is that it can equally capture the extent of the successes and the failures of the experience that you've designed, so ultimately furnishing you with far more valuable feedback. But there's certainly one thing that you need to consider when using any real-time solution, is that you need to choose your moments. So coffee breaks, lunchtime, or even programming a 10-minute feedback session. They'll actually incentivize your attendees to respond to the questions or submit those questionnaires. That would be a much better strategy to actually get the responses that you need for a good sample. Okay, so some effective ways to actually gather the feedback. There are obviously lots of different methods for gathering feedback and evaluation, but we've picked out a few based on Pete's vote earlier. So the first one is paper surveys or evaluation forms. They're probably the most popular of the traditional formats. Some of the positives that they're cheap and can often be very easy to deploy. Print out lots of pieces of paper and hand them out to everybody. Some of the negatives, though, is that they're not always trusted as anonymous because on many occasions people actually have to hand the form into somebody afterwards. And then, if it's an internal session, then you might get recognised by the person you're handing it to. They tend to have relatively low response rates, as we already mentioned, and in some ways aren't very scalable because actually you've then got the challenge of data entry afterwards. Then look at online surveys. So again, look at some of the positives here. Most of the time they're very cheap. They're online, so can be filled in at any time, anywhere. They tend to have very good reporting functionalities, and of course they're easy to deploy. You just tend to send your participants a link afterwards. They do have negatives though. As we've already discussed, they are a reflective method, so the moment is generally passed. They tend to have quite low response rates, as I already mentioned, and only certain types of people will actually complete this type of survey or feedback form, and therefore your results might be slightly skewed. Okay, then looking at a more modern method, so clickers or keypads. They tend to have good reporting functionality. They're in real time for obvious reasons, and because they're in real time, they tend to have relatively high levels of response rates. There are some negatives though. They tend to be quite expensive. Some of the cheaper systems tend to be numeric feedback only. And often they require management, so they're not necessarily a DIY solution. Then we'll look at apps. So for the most part, they're cost effective. They're online so that they can be filled in at any time, anywhere. They will likely have very good reporting functionality. Again, they're in real time. They're often easy to deploy. A bit like Meetoo in terms of having a very simple web app or native app to access. And you will, of course, get pretty high response rates from these. There are negatives, though, of course. You've got respondents using their own devices, which actually isn't appropriate in all environments, and then potentially an issue of connectivity, depending on where you're actually deploying it. But then, no matter what the method of collection, when you do it and for how long are crucial factors in achieving those high rates of response. Don't spring it on people just as they're about to go off and get some food or drink, or worse still, if they're about to go off to the bathroom. They're either going to rush it and then give you poor data, or worse still, they won't respond at all. And that also goes back to what Pete mentioned about expectation setting. It shouldn't be a surprise at all that you're going to be doing this. And whether gathering your feedback on individual topics or sessions, or if it's for an overall course, class or event, be mindful of the length of time that it's actually going to take. Now, according to Survey Gizmo, less than 5 minutes is probably best for gaining the maximum number of responses. And they also state that on average, respondents can complete 5 close-end questions per minute and 2 open-ended questions per minute. So something to think about there. As you can imagine, us here at Meetoo, we are keen advocates of the real-time feedback and evaluation methodology. But in the interest of fairness, I should also point out that real-time could be through an app, it could be through keypads and clickers, or in some circumstances, a type of online survey. But my advice would be to evaluate as you go. Don't wait until the end of the day. Bite-sized sets of feedback questions are really easy to complete. And in my experience, there is little worse than a huge evaluation form or survey to fill in at the end. This also means that the session that's been evaluated is fresh in the mind of your participants. Where possible, try to keep your ranges and scales consistent, or at the very least, slightly similar. It makes it easier for your participants, and it will also then speed up the process of collection. Try not to just open polls or start surveys in the background. Your evaluations are always going to be more successful when somebody, preferably a lecturer, a presenter or a host, actually introduces it, encourages it, and then reminds the participants during the session to actually complete the feedback and evaluations. Now, another great benefit of real-time feedback is that it actually works in favour of the attention behaviour of humans. Now, this chart here shows the typical attention curve of somebody attending an average lecture or meeting. Simply put, it starts off pretty high, but then drops off quite sharply and then stays down pretty much until you tell them to go off and get a coffee, or it is actually the end of the session. So real-time engagement is a great way to actually disrupt this pattern, mainly with the aim of increasing the overall attention of those individuals. So you can make use of this, obviously, by getting feedback as you go, and then potentially a little bit more at the end. So questions like, does this make sense? Are you understanding this? Is this interesting? They're all feedback or evaluation questions that traditionally would have been saved to the end of whatever session you're actually running. So what better way to get this information in real time so that you can actually react to it in the moment and ultimately delivering a better class or meeting. But, You also are going to be getting this measurable and comparable feedback data that you can actually analyse afterwards to help continually drive improvement, and Pete will be talking about that shortly. So far from being annoying, real-time feedback serves that additional purpose of improving the attention curve. There are some key considerations, of course. Adoption and utilisation of any technology. You need to introduce it, you need to test it, and then as Pete mentioned, you need to set those expectations. Why is it important? And hopefully help encourage people to participate. You need to think about the infrastructure. So if you are using an app, is the Wi-Fi sufficient at wherever you're holding your session? Or if it's an app that's fairly light on data, something like Meetoo, is there a good 3 or 4G signal available as well as the Wi-Fi? You need to think about devices. I already mentioned about people using their own devices, but does everybody have a smart device to actually be able to use your app? Do you need to think about potentially providing devices for them? And then the management of the system needs to be accounted for. Who's going to be looking after it to make sure it all works okay for your session? One great thing about Meetoo, of course, is that it's really simple to use and to set up. So for the most part, people do it themselves. But for other solutions or even large-scale sessions, you may require some professional assistance with that. So there are considerations that need to be made when looking at real-time solutions, but I can honestly say that it really is worth it. If you do it properly, you're going to see far higher response rates than by many of those more traditional methods. And that's why clickers were so good. You had an object on everybody's chair that served a very simple purpose, and there were virtually no barriers to adoption. We used to see response rates of upwards of 75%, I think, when we used to use those, and now we're actually starting to see that when people are using apps as well. Okay, so that's the end of my session here. I'd just like to hand back over to Pete now to look at getting some value from the report data.
Thanks, Dermot. Well, to kick off this sort of final section, I'm just going to ask you all a question again using Meetoo. So if you could answer, please, what usually happens with your feedback data? And again, this is the multi-choice answer, so please select all that apply and click that send button in the bottom right-hand corner. So 1, do you do nothing with it? 2, do you look at it on the day? 3, is it looked at on the day and then fed back to a wider group of stakeholders? Is it 4, included in reports? 5, is it fed back to participants? 6, is it added to historic data somewhere? Or 7, is it used in the planning of future sessions? And I can just see those coming in now as it's a multi-choice answer. I'll give you a few more seconds. I can see those rolling in. That's great. So I'll give you 3 more seconds and then we'll close it off. So 3, 2, 1, and let's close that one off. Great, and those results should pop up on your screens now. Okay, so yeah, nothing unexpected here, but good to see that this data was used across a sort of broad variety of ways and mediums, and yeah, there's 12% there that do absolutely nothing with the data, which is not a huge surprise.
It's great to see that so many people actually use it for planning of future sessions, because surely that's the whole point of collecting data, is to continue that improvement. So it's good to see.
Absolutely, it's all about taking action. So moving on to the next slide. Yeah, a massive amount of data was actually captured through feedback forms and evaluation surveys and then never actually acted upon. And this could be for a variety of reasons. It could be because people think they should be asking for feedback, but then perhaps don't have the time to do anything with the results. They don't really care what the results might tell them, or they're not comfortable in delivering or accepting those results. In any case, it's a total waste of everyone's time to take the effort to collect the data and then not use it. So our advice here is only collect actionable data. Take what you need and no more. So we'll assume that you do care and you want to use the data you collect, and so how do you get the most from your data? And just to answer a question in the board there about Meetoo, yes, Meetoo just has the facility to click on a reporting function which puts all the raw data out into Excel. So if you've used a real-time collection method like that, you're likely to have all this stuff in a spreadsheet, which we'll come to in a second. So how do you get value from the data? Well, first of all, there's some instant value, and the chances are if you've used a real-time polling solution or real-time method of collecting the data, you've probably ticked a couple of those boxes that achieve real value straight away. So you may have shared some data live or decided to share the results with stakeholders or peers or presenters instantly after the session is finished. And this in itself is hugely powerful. Another way to use the data straight away is to share it potentially on social media if that's appropriate, or share it in post-event reports and emails. And we see this more often, happening more and more often, is participants might actually have shared this information on your behalf, which again, if it's for marketing purposes or sharing the learnings that people are getting, can be really powerful. So as Dermot mentioned, the value of feedback data can diminish quite rapidly as time passes, and it can be harder for people to accept that data or act on it. So the sooner you analyse the data and communicate it, the more likely that data is going to be accepted and acted upon. Our motto here is, where possible, serve it fresh. So, digging a little deeper, in the past where people had collected data and feedback, they had to transfer it from a format such as paper into an Excel spreadsheet or similar to analyse it. Now, this process, as we mentioned, took a long time and resource. So we're now going to be assuming that you have your data in that Excel format or similar, and you have the opportunity then to dig much deeper. Now, in our years of experience of real-time feedback, many of our most successful clients are the ones that really, really interrogate their data. And I'll just share the most common practices that we've seen with them with you now. So first of all, data comparisons. So taking historical data to link sessions and report on trends. Now, a question that actually just came through in the board was, can you ask the same question, like, do you understand, or how do you feel about this, several times throughout a session? Absolutely, you can. You can ask these questions again and again, and there's even instant ways of visualising if there's been an opinion or a knowledge shift. Also, this can be done after the event using these reports. And what we've seen is that span over time periods of days, months, and even years. We have clients that have used different methods of collection, but actually kept their data and compare it year on year, and it's really powerful for them. Next method is to cross-tabulate the data. So further drilling down on the data based on demographic information collected throughout the session. Does the feedback vary depending who they are, what they are, or how they feel about something? So asking information about job roles, gender, age, and so on can really help you pinpoint areas for improvement or excellence. A good example here is, on the surface, a fairly well spread or average result on a rating question may indicate that there's a broad range of views, but no real trend there. But actually, if you split that down by demographics, that result could reveal something completely different. For example, a complete gender or age divide over the subject that's being presented. So lastly, whatever you do with your data, keep those records. You may want to revisit it further down the line. You may also want to use it, as I mentioned a second ago, year on year or session on session. And it's a really good way to help benchmark and set targets, whether those be education targets or in the corporate world. So really good for planning future sessions. And finally, and this is one that we've discovered as a business ourselves in the last few years, think beyond the improvement of your own sessions and your organisation, and actually, could these reports hold other value? A great example of this is using the insights drawn from the data for industry reports, white papers, or maybe to be the data behind infographics. So there's a lot of power in this data that's being collected. So that kind of brings us to the end of my session and the end of this whistle-stop tour. I hope you found it useful. If you haven't found it useful, or you have, please do tell us. We do value your feedback, and we do listen to it. So please, the discussion board's open, and just after the Q&A session we're about to have, we'll ask you a couple of quick evaluation polls as well. So if we can ask you to answer those for us, that would be really helpful. So thank you very much. Right, over to you, Dermot. Let's see what's coming on the board.
Thanks very much, Pete. So we've had quite a few good questions in here, so that's really good. Bob has sent in a few, so I'll just go through some of these. Can I gather feedback during polling and from within a PowerPoint? So we're using a PowerPoint add-in that links to Meetoo to open a polling today. So yes, absolutely, you can certainly use it within PowerPoint. Can I keep my meeting open to gather feedback after a physical teaching session is finished? Yes, absolutely. You can leave your meeting open for as long as you like. And actually coming soon into Meetoo will be a more self-paced survey functionality, so you're able to use that as well.
And that's something we're going to do now. We might not get through all these questions and finish on time, which we wanted, but we will go back and answer any questions within the app.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, and Bob, it looks like you had a technical issue. We'll get back to that one because it's not necessarily a question. Does Meetoo have analytics reporting available? Yes, absolutely, William, it does. Good question. There's an Excel export that you can do straight out of your dashboard, which is really easy to do.
Okay, so we've got on joining the create profile message, it's not intuitive. How can this be clearer? So everything we do is about trying to make this as clear and as simple as possible. So great feedback. We might actually ask you a couple more questions on this afterwards. There's two ways you can get people to enter the app, and actually if you set it to anonymous mode, it actually skips out that whole process as well. So if you want people to go in anonymously and with the least barrier to entry, that's the way to do that. But we're actually every 6 weeks we do a release and we put UI improvements in there. So all this kind of feedback is really helpful to us and helps us fine tune the tool. So thank you.
Sure. Another one from Bob here. Some options had to be scrolled on the last poll. Can we show a number of options? So the app does actually tell you that there are 7 options to choose from. So you can choose up to 7 options and press send. You've also, if you're using the PowerPoint visualization, you're able to see how many options there are. Hopefully that makes sense. Tessa's got a good point here. I don't see an option where people are asked to give their consent to use their data. Can you build it in? So there's 2 parts to this, I think. One, there is a terms of service link when you're joining a session in Meetoo. But also some of that responsibility needs to go to the host or the presenter about how they're going to be using this data afterwards. We don't use anybody's data. We don't look at anybody's data. But actually, if the person running the session is collecting information from you, then they should set those clear expectations, as Pete mentioned at the start, as to what they're going to do with it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And with the GDRP coming in, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of and a lot of people are working on now, it's actually something we're putting together some advice for Meetoo users on, which will be relevant actually to a lot of data collection, but some advice together, and we're running a future article we'll be sending out and also running a future webinar on that to help people in setting those expectations. So yeah, really good question, really timely.
And one last one from Kim. Can you keep polls available after the close of the call? So the polls at the moment in Meetoo are real time, so you can leave a poll open for as long as you like. I think I've left one open for 2 days once in advance of a meeting. But actually, as I mentioned, we've got this more offline survey style questioning feature coming very soon to Meetoo, so hopefully that will help with that. If any more questions do come in, we will certainly get to answer them. But I just want to move on briefly to get our evaluation questions in to make sure we're getting our feedback from you. I've just pasted out this slide, which is some references that we use for today's session, and they're also good, useful resources on the subject that we went through. We do host other webinars as well. So we do regular jump starters and top tips for using Meetoo, so anybody can join those, and I will be pasting that out as well into the app. But actually, what I want to get to here is, what did you actually think of this webinar? So this is a question that we ask at the end of every single webinar that we do, whether they're small ones or larger ones like this. And we always keep it consistent because actually we have our database building up, and we measure all of these sessions that we do, and we actually look at all the other activities that we do around these sessions to actually see if we can pinpoint the killer thing that makes them the most successful webinars that we've done. So your honest feedback to this would be absolutely appreciated. Don't pull your punches. And actually, after we close this, we're going to ask you to put anything else into the discussion board afterwards that might help us improve these sessions, because it's certainly what we want to do. So okay, I'm just going to close that question off now, and we can then. We're going to spare our blushes, so Pete and I will have a look at that afterwards. And then, as I said, please let us know how we can actually improve all of these sessions. Just pop it onto the discussion board there for us. Now, just before we go, I just want to remind you all that we have a YouTube channel where the recording of this session and all our other webinars can be found, and we have our Trustpilot. We'd really like any of you that actually use Meetoo, either every now and again, once off, or regularly, please leave us a Trustpilot review. It really helps us drive the product forward and lets other people know a bit more about Meetoo. Ian, I've just seen your question come in. We'll get back to you on the board with that in due course. So thanks very much for that. Okay, I think that's all from us for today. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Pete, for joining today as well. We hope to see you on the next Meetoo webinar.
Thanks everyone.